If a lie is large enough, can it kill millions before the truth has a chance to speak? Chernobyl is not just the name of a nuclear power plant. It is the name of a mass murder case in which the killer was not machinery, but folders stamped top secret. Why did a safety test turn into the worst nuclear disaster in human history? Why did the authorities remain silent while children were innocently playing beneath radioactive rain? Today, we will not simply retell the events of the explosion. We will uncover the dark secrets that people tried to bury along with reactor number 4's core for nearly 40 years. The human body has a remarkable warning system. When exposed to a high enough dose of radiation, nerve receptors react, creating a metallic taste on the tongue, a tingling burn on the skin, and sudden nausea. That is how evolution taught us to recognize danger. But no one in Pripyat knew that night. They stood on their balconies, looking toward the Lenin nuclear power plant 3 kilometers away. They saw something almost miraculous, a pale blue-violet beam rising into the night sky like a giant lighthouse. It was beautiful enough to be hypnotic. Some people called their neighbors. Some put on coats and sat outside to watch. Children were woken up. Adults pointed at the sky and wondered what was happening. No one thought it was a disaster, because a disaster could not look so beautiful. But that blue glow, called the Cherenkov effect, appears when radioactive particles move faster than the speed of light in air. It was the sign that Chernobyl's reactor number 4 core had exploded. Tons of radioactive graphite were falling onto rooftops, and countless radioactive particles were rising into the atmosphere, invisible, odorless, and silent. They were entering the lungs of the people standing on those balconies. It was 1:30 a.m. on April 26, 1986, and the story does not begin here. It began years earlier. It began in the corridors of power in Moscow, in classified files never made public, and in a system designed from the start so that no one could speak the truth. Pripyat was the city the Soviet Union wanted the world to see. If the Soviet Union wanted to prove that socialism could build the future, it would point you to Pripyat. The city was founded in 1970. It was designed as a symbol of science, peaceful atomic energy, and humanity conquering nature. It had 49,000 residents. Their average age was 26. It was one of the youngest cities in the Soviet Union. They had department stores full of goods while the rest of the country stood in line for bread. They had an Olympic swimming pool, a cinema, and a stadium. The amusement park had just been completed. The Ferris wheel was scheduled to open on May 1, 1986 for International Workers' Day. At the center of all that prosperity stood the Lenin Nuclear Power Plant. The plant had 4 RBMK reactors, each with a capacity of 1,000 megawatts. They supplied electricity to a large region of Ukraine and part of Europe. The RBMK was the pride of the Soviet nuclear industry. Unlike Western reactors that required expensive enriched uranium, the RBMK used cheaper fuel and could be refueled while still operating. But the RBMK had a design flaw that had long been known and was deliberately concealed. In reactor physics, there is a concept called the void coefficient. Put simply, it asks, when cooling water turns to steam bubbles, how does the reactor respond? For most Western reactors, the answer is negative. When bubbles appear, the nuclear reaction decreases and the reactor stabilizes itself. With the RBMK, the answer is positive. When bubbles appear, the nuclear reaction increases, producing more heat, creating more bubbles, and then raising the reaction further in an uncontrollable feedback loop. Put bluntly, under certain conditions, an RBMK reactor could increase its own power until it destroyed itself. And nothing could stop it. Soviet engineers had known this since the early 1970s. An internal 1975 safety analysis clearly identified this flaw. That document was stamped secret. No warning was sent to the plants operating RBMK reactors across the Soviet Union. Not a single operator was trained to handle this situation. Because if it were disclosed, the Soviet Union would have had to admit that its proud nuclear technology had a serious flaw. And in a system where national prestige mattered more than safety, that was unacceptable. On the night of April 25, 1986, the drama began. Reactor number 4 was scheduled to perform a safety test. The goal was to see whether, in the event of a sudden power loss, the spinning turbines could provide enough electricity to run the cooling pumps for 60 to 75 seconds until the backup generator started. The test was supposed to be carried out during the day, under the supervision of the most experienced shift leader. But the Ukrainian power grid suddenly needed electricity during the day, so the test was pushed to the night shift. It was the least experienced shift, staffed by young engineers who had never performed this procedure before. The test was overseen by Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov. Those who worked under him described him with one sentence: "You were not allowed to disagree with him." Trouble began when the power reduction did not go according to plan. The reactor dropped to nearly zero power. It was an extremely unstable state called xenon poisoning. This state made the reactor nearly unable to sustain a stable nuclear reaction. In that situation, safety procedures required stopping and waiting at least a full day for the xenon to decay naturally. But Dyatlov did not stop. He ordered the young engineers to withdraw almost all the control rods to save the test. That pushed the reactor into an extremely dangerous operating zone. Reactor operator Leonid Toptanov, only 26 years old, knew this violated procedure. He hesitated. Dyatlov looked at him and said, "If you do not want to do it, I will find someone else." Toptanov withdrew the control rods. The test began at 1:23:04 a.m. on April 26th. For the first few seconds, everything went according to plan. The turbines began to slow down. The pumps lost power. The countdown continued. But as the pumps slowed, coolant flow dropped, temperatures in the fuel channels surged, and steam bubbles began to form. The RBMK reactor, with its positive void coefficient, began increasing power exponentially. At 1:23:40, the instruments reached dangerous levels. Senior engineer Alexander Akimov shouted, "Press AZ5, emergency shutdown now." At 1:23:45, the AZ5 button was pressed. AZ5 was the emergency shutdown button. It was meant to insert all 211 control rods into the reactor core to absorb neutrons and stop the reaction. But this was exactly where the hidden design flaw lay. The control rods were made of boron, a neutron absorber, but their tips contained graphite sections. When the rods first entered the core, the graphite tips went in first. Graphite did not absorb neutrons and instead temporarily increased the reaction. In the first 3 seconds after the emergency button was pressed, reactor power surged to around 30,000 megawatts. That was 10 times the reactor's maximum design power. At 1:23:47, reactor number 4 exploded. There were 2 explosions in quick succession. One was a steam explosion. The other was a violent energy release that blew the 1,000-ton concrete lid off the reactor like the top of a tin can. The reactor core, still active, still radioactive, and thousands of degrees hot, now lay exposed beneath the night sky. At 1:28 a.m., only 8 minutes after the explosion, the Pripyat fire brigade received the call. The information they received was simple: roof fire at the power plant. Firefighters Pripyat and Kibinok, both only 23 years old, led their teams to the site. They wore no radiation protective gear because no one told them they needed it. They climbed onto the roof and began fighting the flames by hand. Around them lay black-gray cylindrical fragments, graphite pieces thrown from the reactor core by the blast. Each fragment emitted enough radiation to kill a person after only a few hours of direct exposure. One firefighter picked up a fragment, examined it, and dropped it. He said, "Hot, like live coal." No one knew what it was. The radiation meters they carried could measure only up to 3.6 Roentgens per hour. The needle stopped at 3.6. Many people looked at it and thought, not too bad. But in reality, radiation levels on parts of the roof were around 15,000 to 30,000 Roentgens per hour. That was enough to cause death after only minutes of exposure. Around 2 a.m., Dyatlov went to inspect the site. He saw the devastation. He saw the fire. He saw debris scattered everywhere. Then he returned to the office and reported to Director Viktor Brukhanov that the reactor was damaged, but the core remained intact and the situation was under control. That was the first lie. But it was not the last. Brukhanov sent Moscow a report stating that radiation levels at the site were 3.6 roentgens per hour. It was the reading from a meter that had already hit its maximum limit. It was a false number that had nothing to do with reality. But in the Soviet bureaucracy, no one wanted to be the bearer of bad news. No one wanted to admit that they did not know what was really happening. So 3.6 became the official number. And based on that number, the authorities in Moscow decided that evacuation was not yet necessary. On the morning of April 26, 1986, Pripyat woke up like any other day. Children packed their school bags, adults went to work. Schools opened at 8 a.m. By then, local health officials already knew that a serious accident had occurred. Some doctors had already received the first firefighters showing symptoms of acute radiation exposure: nausea, vomiting, and skin reddened as if by severe sunburn. But no order was given to close the schools. No warning was broadcast over the loudspeakers. Children played outside in the warm spring morning. A gentle wind moved through the city. The weather was beautiful, and countless invisible radioactive particles floated in the very air they were breathing. At the local hospital, an order came down from above. The word radiation exposure was not to be written in patient records. Instead, they were told to write vegetative vascular disorder. It was a vague diagnosis that suggested no real danger and left no clear statistical trace. Because if the record said radiation exposure, that would be evidence. And evidence would create accountability. In a system without accountability, evidence is the most dangerous thing of all. The decision to evacuate Pripyat's 49,000 residents was made on the afternoon of April 26th, 16 hours after the explosion. But the actual evacuation order was not carried out until 2 p.m. on April 27th. That was 36 hours after the explosion. Residents were told over loudspeakers to prepare for a temporary evacuation lasting 3 days. They were told to bring only documents and the bare essentials. Temporary, 3 days. Many people left behind pets, belongings, and houseplants, because who would take their whole life with them for just 3 days? None of those 49,000 people ever returned to live there. And during those 36 hours of delay, tens of thousands of people breathed, ate, and lived in an environment where radiation levels were thousands of times above safe limits. On the morning of April 26th, the first firefighters and plant workers began arriving at hospitals with symptoms of acute radiation sickness. Pripyat and Kibinok, the two young commanders, died within 2 weeks. They were only 23 years old. Acute radiation sickness does not kill in a quick or tidy way. It kills layer by layer. The first hours bring nausea, vomiting, and terrible headaches. Then comes a brief silent phase when the patient feels better and can still walk around. Someone unaware of the danger might think they were recovering. But inside, the bone marrow is being destroyed. The immune system is collapsing. The skin begins to peel away in patches. Internal organs begin bleeding from within. Nurses and doctors at Hospital No. 6 in Moscow later said they could not stand near the beds for very long. Not because of fear, but because the radiation coming from the patient's own bodies was enough to affect their caregivers. The men who touched graphite with bare hands and stood on the roof in the first hour did not die from something striking them from outside. They died from what had entered inside them. In the first days after the explosion, scientists recognized another danger, even greater than what had already happened. Beneath the burning reactor was a massive reservoir of cooling water. If the melting reactor core continued downward and touched that water, the result could be a catastrophic second explosion. That explosion was believed capable of destroying the remaining 3 reactors and spreading radiation across a vast part of Europe. To prevent that from happening, someone had to descend into the flooded tunnels beneath the reactor and open the drainage valves. No one knew exactly how high the radiation levels were in those tunnels. No one was sure they would come back alive. 3 men volunteered. They were diver Boris Baranov and plant engineers Alexei Ananenko and Valery Bespalov. In diving suits, carrying flashlights and mechanical tools, they waded through dark, knee-deep water in tunnels beneath the radioactive reactor above them. At last, they found the drainage valves. It took them more than an hour to open them. The water began to drain away. For many years, people said that all three men died shortly afterward from radiation sickness. That is not true. Boris Baranov died in 2005 of heart disease. Alexei Ananenko and Valery Bespalov remained alive for many years afterward. The truth is more ordinary than the heroic legend, but that does not make their actions any less great. They did not know whether they would survive, and they went anyway. In the months and years after the explosion, a massive force was mobilized. They were called the Liquidators. There were around 600,000 of them from across the Soviet Union. They included conscripts, construction workers, miners, helicopter pilots, and nuclear engineers. Their task was to clear radioactive debris from the roofs, bury surrounding villages, and build the huge concrete shell over the reactor known as the sarcophagus. The roof work could not be done by robots. Radiation levels were so high that the experimental robots all suffered electronic failure, so humans had to do it by hand with shovels. Each man was allowed to stay on the roof for no more than 40 seconds, just enough time to shovel a few loads of radioactive debris and throw them over the edge, then run back down. The next man would climb up. There were tens of thousands of such turns. Each turn lasted only 40 seconds. There is no complete official record of the health consequences suffered by those 600,000 people. The Soviet Union collapsed before the epidemiological studies were completed. The successor states did not have the funds to continue them. The data was lost, scattered, and never fully assembled. We know that some died of cancer, some died of heart disease. Illness rates in this group were significantly higher than in the general population. But we do not know the final number, and in a sense, that is the second crime after the first. The people who prevented an even greater catastrophe do not even have an official number by which history can remember them. Today, if you go to Pripyat, you will see a city being swallowed by nature. Apartment blocks are sinking into vegetation. Birch trees grow through the floors of abandoned buildings. Foxes wander through hotel corridors. In the kindergarten, old dolls still lie on the floor, exactly where they have remained since 1986. Tiny gas masks meant for children are still there. School books still lie open. On the edge of the city, the yellow Ferris wheel, never opened and never carrying a single child, stands motionless in absolute silence. The first concrete shell, the sarcophagus built in 1986, deteriorated over time. In 2016, a vast new steel structure was installed over the entire site. It is called the New Safe Confinement. It weighs 36,000 tons and rises taller than the Statue of Liberty. It is the largest movable structure ever built on land. It was designed to last 100 years. After those 100 years, humanity will need another structure, and after another 100 years, yet another one. Because beneath all that steel and concrete, reactor number 4's core is still decaying and still emitting radiation. It has not truly gone cold. It is estimated that the area will take around 20,000 years to become fully safe for humans again. Our civilization, as far as we know, is not even half that old. The question Chernobyl leaves behind is not really only about nuclear power, nor is it only about technology. It is not merely about defense budgets or Soviet scientific priorities. The question Chernobyl leaves behind is about something much simpler and far more universal. What happens when a system cannot contain the truth? The RBMK design flaw was known in 1975, but it was never disclosed. The engineers knew the test conditions that night were dangerous, but no one could say no to Dyatlov. Officials knew the true radiation levels from the early morning of the 26th, but still reported a false number to Moscow. Doctors knew the patients were irradiated, yet wrote vegetative vascular disorder in the records. Not a single link in that chain of disaster required a madman, a monster, or someone deliberately trying to destroy the world. Everyone in this story was ordinary, behaving exactly as the system had taught them to behave. That system said fulfilling the plan mattered more than safety. That system said national prestige mattered more than truth. That system said the bearer of bad news would be punished. When a system is built on such principles, no one needs to want disaster to happen. It will happen according to the system's own internal logic. Later, Edward Shevardnadze said that Chernobyl, more than any other factor, accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev agreed. He wrote in his memoir that Chernobyl exposed the Soviet collapse more clearly than perestroika itself. Not because of atomic bombs or missiles, but because of something simpler. When the world saw that the Soviet Union had known and still remained silent, it began to question everything else the Soviet Union had ever claimed. Trust, once lost, does not return unchanged. And that is Chernobyl's final lesson. Not only for the Soviet Union, but for all of us. No reactor is more dangerous than a system that cannot contain the truth. Because truth does not disappear simply because people refuse to speak of it. It only accumulates, like radiation in the air, invisible and odorless. And then comes the moment when nothing can stop it from exploding. Thank you for listening to The Full Story, and don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos.